Okay, so I know it's been a long week so far. Thank you very much for coming to the me to take an hour of your time today. Basically, what I wanted to do was try and sort of get everyone a bit more acquainted with social media, sort of share some tips and stuff that I've learned over time, my time as being a social media manager. And kind of, if you are at your beginning journey of social media, you've not got an account or anything like that, or a jagex social media account, then hopefully some of this will help sort of get you on that ladder. Just a little bit of background about myself. I'm James Day. Sorry, I said that at the beginning. Most people probably call me JD. I'm social media manager here at jagex. I've been in 2 years in March. Before that, I worked at a small business advice lab based in Finchley. One of the key things we did there was something called Small Business Saturday. I don't know if anybody here's heard of it at all. It's the third Saturday before Christmas. We try and get everyone to shop in a small business. The first year that we did it, about 500 million was spent in small businesses in the UK on that day. So it was really, really successful. Trend on Twitter #1 in the UK. So yeah, hopefully I think that might have caught the attention of jagex, so that's why I've got this answer for this role. So, a brief sort of outline. I apologise, I've never actually used a clicker before, so hopefully this goes okay. So, an outline of the kinds of things that I'll be sort of sharing with you guys today. So, start off with the basics, start off with kind of the very, very broad stuff that will kind of get you onto social media. So things you need to be thinking about before you even get started. So why social media is important. Some of the platforms that we'll be looking at a little bit more detail with specific reference to RuneScape. Some tips on how to create a perfect post. Some tips on how you can measure success. And some little extra things that I've learned in my 4 years in the industry. And I've got some accompanying pictures as well, so everybody's happy. So, hands up if you have a social media account. Of any description. Okay, so hopefully that kind of indicates how important social media is in society. It's kind of permeated into society now. Most things require, or most things you get in life at the moment seems go through social media first. News. I always check for instance, first on Twitter, for instance. But there are a few things you need to learn before you get on social media, before you even start, before you set up a Twitter account, before you start producing content you're going to be putting on YouTube. So this is going to kind of hopefully go over those kinds of things. So why is it important for brands? I'm going to be talking about branded social media as well as some personal stuff to do as well, so bear with me. I'm going to try and cover as much ground as I possibly can in an hour, stuff that's useful for all kinds of people. So why is it important for brands? And I found this quote which I quite liked, and it's something that I'm going to reiterate quite a lot during this presentation, and it's something that I really want you guys to take away with you. Social media is just that, it's social. You are talking to people, you're not talking to businesses, you're not talking to robots, you're talking to people. And it's always important to bear that in mind when you're on social media. A little stat here that I just found, nearly 2/3 of American adults use social networking sites. Not surprisingly, there weren't that many using it in 2005. So that kind of shows how important it is to kind of target that market and leverage it to try and get people from your business. So what else? What other reasons why would you want to be on social media as a brand? Well, increased brand recognition, higher brand authority. I don't know about you, but the first place that I go to if I have a good experience with brands or a bad experience with brands is on social media, and I either tell my mates that I've bought a pair of trainers that I really, really like, or I'll go and complain about a brand if they're giving me crap customer service. So we need to make sure that you need to make sure that they're going onto social media for the right reasons. You're establishing brand authority for the right reasons. People will complain as much as they are positive. You need to try and make sure that you are mediating between the two of those things. Next one, increased website traffic is kind of a given really, so I'm going to skip past that one quite quickly. Another reason why you might want to be on social media is a fantastic opportunity for marketers like myself. I know there's people over in that corner over there as well. We've never had it so good in terms of being able to create content, being able to provide creative experiences for our customers. So whether that is YouTube videos, whether that is fantastic infographic, I know we love that word over there. Infographics, that kind of thing. I know Sony, I think it was the release of the PS4, produced an interactive video where you could scroll through the video, see some retro, every time you saw a retro Sony character or PlayStation character and you clicked, and the more clicks that you got, the more content you got provided to you for the PS4. So that's a really cool interactive way of being able to engage your audience. That's just an example. There are plenty of other ones out there. Better search ranking results. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about SEO a little bit later on, which is search engine optimization. I do have a buzzwords slide as well, so you'll if I say something that sounds a bit jargony, hopefully that will kind of mean that you won't be so confused. But yeah, when you do something good on social, when you go viral, you'll be the first thing that people see on search engine. Well, I say search engines, probably Google. And this is a really important one, particularly for RuneScape, is that we can get insight a lot more quickly on social media than we can anywhere else. And I think a fantastic example of this is actually Invention, which came out on Monday. We were able to gather sentiment really, really quickly, gather useful information about bugs and that kind of thing really, really quickly, and appease our customers a lot more quickly than we would have been able to otherwise. And it's a lot more freely given as well. It's a lot easier to send a tweet than it is to send a really long email, for instance. You get more bang for your buck. So there's a stat there which says, according to HubSpot, 84% of marketers found that as little as 6 hours per week was enough to produce increased traffic. I know it's a little bit of a loaded stat because 6 times nothing is more than that, but anyway. It shows that actually you don't need to be putting in a massive amount of time to get quite a lot back. Loads of new conversion opportunities, higher conversion rates, and what I mean by conversion is somebody that goes from being a non-paying customer to making purchase. So studies have shown social has a 100% higher lead to close ratio than outbound marketing. So it's more time effective, it's more cost effective, it's more effective. Sorry to any other marketers out there. Okay. And most importantly, improved brand loyalty as well. This is one of the intangible things that is basically impossible for social media marketers to monitor. Oh, you're turning up, okay, cool. But it's also one of the most important. So 53% of Americans who follow brands on social are more loyal to those brands as a result. And within sort of our target market of 18 to 24-year-olds, that goes up even more. So we want to be thinking about how we can make people brand advocates, how we can encourage loyalty within our customers, and the positive effects that can have upon a business. So time for a bit of audience participation. Do some debunking of myths. So put your hands up if you think that Facebook is dying. I'll show you. It's you're actually wrong. Facebook isn't dying. As you can see, sort of on this, when we get to Q sort of 3 of 2015, it's actually got a period of slightly higher growth than the last couple of years before that. So if anything, Facebook's actually getting stronger, which is scary given that it already has 1.5 billion users. So that's one account for every 4 people on the planet. And that's also in new areas as well. So you'll have places in the Far East, for instance, getting a lot more social savvy as well. So emerging markets, chance to leverage those for sales. Number 2, so hands up if you think Twitter has taken over the universe. Okay, cool. You got that one right. It's not taking over the universe, but it's plateauing. So the last couple of years, Twitter, it was kind of the darling of social media, lots of people using it, and it ended up being probably bigger than it ever wanted to be. So now they're trying to monetize it. They're trying to make it more of an attractive proposition for marketers. But it has meant that as a result, they've received a lot less organic growth than they would have been able to originally. So as you can see, they've only gone up 5 million users in the last year or so.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. Twitter, as a result of the trying to become more amenable to marketers, has actually meant that they've had sort of more algorithmically focused timelines. So you might have seen things like the what are they called? The while you were away style posts that come up on Twitter now, and that is the content that people of your network have liked the most and have engaged with the most. So you can see that when you first come over there. And you can see things like the new Moments feature, which is the lightning bolt, where people can get sponsored moments, you can get sponsored hashtags, sponsored posts, all that kind of stuff. So it's becoming a lot more algorithmically focused, but that does mean that the good quality content rises to the top. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And the third one, hands up if you think that Instagram is just for selfies and Kim Kardashian and food pictures. Pictures of your lunch, yeah. No, you'd be wrong. It's actually experienced more growth than Twitter in the last 2 years. In fact, it's doubled in the last, not even 2 years, year and a half almost. 400 million users has actually got more users than Twitter. And it's one of the other things that I want to get out of this presentation is actually, people always think of Facebook, Twitter as the two big ones, and then sort of everything else comes as second to that. Actually, Instagram is right up there. It is huge at the moment, and we should be using it a lot more than we actually are. We should be leveraging it a lot more. There's a big gap in Instagram for gaming brands. And just another graph that I found online that I thought was quite useful. Apologies if you can't actually read it. It's quite an intricate graph. But it just says why people follow brands on social. And the top two shouldn't really surprise you. To receive offers and competitions, to keep up to date with the latest news about them, figures really. The ones that I was quite interested about, the four kind of ones below, as you can see, they're kind of separated into Facebook and Twitter. I'd have actually thought that most of them would have been the other way around. So to receive more info related to my personal interests, actually more people follow on Twitter for that, which I thought was really surprising, given that with Facebook you get you like this, you might like this one more kind of thing, and your friends like this one. So I was quite surprised by that. And the bottom one, which is probably the problem that we have most with RuneScape, is to show other people that I like them. I get so many comments that say, I would like the RuneScape Facebook page, but I don't want my friends to know. And one of the things that I tried to do with the RuneScape Twitter and RuneScape social media accounts is actually make them more cool for people and make them more sort of likeable for people to say, yeah, I like their page, and I'm not ashamed of it. So what should you do before you start? And these are some questions that I'm going to ask of you guys. They don't really have finite answers to them, because every brand, every business, every person is different. But I'll do my best to kind of give you some tips and nudge you in the right direction. Here's what not to do. And I've seen a lot of people do this in the past, even people that stand up here and do presentations about social media at conferences. They say, just get on all the platforms that you can. No, you shouldn't do that at all. You need to be thinking about everything before you go onto platforms. You need to be preparing, planning, structuring, strategizing what it is you want to be doing, and then you won't have to get into this conundrum here, figuring it out later. It's not a good place to be in. So the first thing you need to be thinking about is success. What defines success for you, and what defines Freudian slip, defines success for your business. That could be any number of things. That could be offering a customer service solution. That could be changing the perception of a brand. It could be conversions into paying customers, or it can be something like providing content, useful content, teasers, news about your business to your customers. So you need to define what that is, and that's really, really important, because that will then formulate pretty much everything else that you do. Secondly, how are you going to measure that success? And this is one of the really difficult things in social media, because there are so many other mitigating factors that happen when you're in charge of social media. It's really difficult to be able to measure what it is that you're doing, particularly if you want to do something along the lines of changing the perception of a brand. How on earth are you going to measure that? You can do things like surveys, A lot of the platforms have got really good analytics systems now, so you can measure things like impressions on engagement, all that kind of stuff. So think about how you're going to measure it, because that will then help you when you come back to try and reiterate it later on. Where should you be? Now, here's where we get into the platforms. Here's where we start thinking about where it is you are going to be. This is probably the most difficult one to actually decide, because you need to kind of think about 3 different areas. You need to be thinking about what platforms offer the strengths to your business. So if you are, for instance, a business-to-business or B2B business, you are going to be thinking about something like LinkedIn, because there are a lot of professionals on there. And I know a lot of people laugh and make jokes about Google+, but actually there is quite a strong business presence on there. There are quite a few business communities on there. So you want to be thinking about those kinds of things. Whereas if you are a more business-to-consumer business, or you are a mobile business, you want to be thinking about things that are image friendly. You want to be thinking about things like Instagram, Vine, Snapchat, things to be able to draw in a younger audience. Second thing you need to think about is where your audience actually are. And that's just as important. In fact, probably more important, because there's no point in being somewhere where you're going to be, you've got all your strengths, but actually there is nobody there to listen. So you need to be thinking about that, and also where your potential audience are. So where you can actually pick up more conversions than your existing player base or your existing consumer base. So you kind of need to weigh up those 3 different options. I would suggest that if it ends up being fairly even, you choose the platform which your existing player, your existing customer base is on. But yeah, it's a really difficult one. And I always struggle to, when I sort of try and come up with a strategy, I always struggle to choose which platforms will be most successful for that particular brand. What should you post? Again, this is kind of a horses for courses question. How long is a piece of string? Again, because it's very relevant to the actual business in question, or the brand in question, and what kind of resources that you have. If you've got somebody who's fantastic at producing video, for instance, you want to make the most of that. If you've got someone in your company that's fantastic at writing blog posts, a really strong writer, you might want to be thinking about how you can use something like WordPress plugins, for instance, to be able to share what it is you're doing. But yeah, there are plenty of options out there. And again, it's kind of also reliant on the platforms that you choose, because something like Facebook will allow you to do lots of different things with video and images. You can create things like slideshows, you can create carousel images. However, something like Instagram will allow you to do 15 seconds worth of video, just 15 seconds. So you need to think about what you can cram into 15 seconds. When should you post and how often? And again, I'm not going to be able to give you a definitive answer here. It's dependent on each business in question, but to give a frame of reference, we're really lucky at RuneScape and at Jagex in general, because we have a hell of a lot of content that goes into our games every single week, and a thriving community that produces a lot of content as well. So I can pretty much get away with putting something out on Twitter every couple of hours or so. That's not the same for every business. You will want to be putting out things when you've got things to put out, basically. You don't want to be putting things out for the sake of it, and sort of scale that to your output. What you do want to be thinking about, though, is putting out your peak pieces of content, the things that you think are really going to gain a lot of engagement at your peak time. So RuneScape peak period is probably between about 7 and 11 o'clock at night, which is when we would choose to be putting out our peak content, the content that we think will gain the most amount of engagement. But don't just stop there. Think about, I mean, we've obviously got a really strong North American contingent and UK contingent. We also have an Australian contingent as well, and they're going to want to be able to see that content as well. So think about how you can structure it in a way that everybody gets to see that, but you're not seeming spammy at the same time, basically. And once you've done all these things, 3 months down the line, how are you going to reassess what you're doing? How are you going to appraise your success criteria? Because that will have changed. That will be slightly different than what it was when you first started. So have a look. Have you got any new aims? Have you got any new tools out there that you could use? Is there anything that has changed within your business that you're going to need to consider? Have you lost a member of staff that produced all of your video content, for instance? You need to be really thinking what you're doing and then reiterating I would say every 2 or 3 months or so. And here we get onto the buzzwords, everyone's favourite. So native content, and I'll say this quite a lot when we get into the actual platforms and we talk a little bit more about them. Native content is just content which is directly uploaded through or optimized through that platform. So something like Facebook video, if you upload a video directly through Facebook rather than linking to a YouTube video, for instance, or if you use something like Periscope on Twitter, or you use Vine on Twitter, because Twitter owns those two tools, they're more likely to be more aesthetically pleasing on those platforms. Same could be said for Instagram and Facebook. And just as a side note, have you noticed that when you share an Instagram post on Twitter, you just get a link rather than an image? That's because Facebook or Twitter don't own Instagram, and they don't want them to be successful, essentially. CTA, this is a marketer's buzzword, call to action, encouraging any of your customers to perform an action after reading what it is you've got to say. And I've stuck a little CTA in there, so thumbs up, anyone? Yay, there we go. Engagement is just any kind of action that a customer or community member performs after seeing something that you have posted, whether that is a like, whether that is a share, or anything like that at all, or moving onto your website, clicking a link, that kind of thing. It's a nice, easy one, organic or paid social media. Organic is free, paid is paid. Organic is the stuff that happens without you trying to push it through a paid medium. SEO, and I don't think Jason is here. Jason can explain this, Jason Cartwright in digital marketing can explain this a lot better than I can. He's not here. Okay. The manipulation of keywords, metadata, and lots more fancy stuff that I don't quite understand to ensure that you rank higher in search engines. And social does come into that. Tone, which is probably the most important of these buzzwords, your brand or individual voice that you use. And that can be, I say try and keep it consistent across all your different platforms, but be aware that different platforms will allow you to talk in slightly different ways. So when you've got Twitter, you've got 140 characters to try and articulate your message, whereas in something like LinkedIn or something like Facebook, you've got significantly more space to be able to say what it is you've got to say. So have a think about that. But tone should be kept fairly similar. EdgeRank, which is our social media marketer's worst nightmare, it's Facebook's newsfeed algorithm. And it's dependent on so many different factors. I've spent 4 years in social media and I can't even pretend to try and work out what that algorithm is. I still get confused when some things do really, really well and some things don't do so well. But it's dependent on loads of factors, including native content, post type, how much engagement it gets and how quickly it gets that engagement. And that will you will then see that in your timeline. But it does mean that if you don't pay for content or if you don't pay for promotion, in all likelihood, you'll be lucky to see 10% of your audience actually see most of your posts. ROI, return on investment. Quite simple. How much money you spend, you aim to try and make as much money out of that as you possibly can. So part 2, talking a little bit more about the platforms in a bit more detail. And I'm going to kind of focus here on the ones that we spend the most amount of time on at Jagex. There are plenty more to go and explore. But yeah, I'll get into it. So Twitter, I'm not going to insult any of your intelligences by going right down to the basics, but it's ideal for short, sharp, snappy messages and real-time engagement. I mentioned before getting feedback really, really quickly on things like updates. It's what it's really, really good for. Retweeting, you can like, which they've obviously just stolen off of Facebook, or you can reply to tweets, and each of those things helps to amplify the original reach of the post. You can have up to 4 images, and they cost you 24 characters in a post, but it doesn't matter how many images you use, it's still 24 characters, and links will cost you 23 characters no matter how long they are. They've recently introduced polls, integrated polls into where you can basically choose up to 4 options and ask your following what it is that they think about them. And they allow you to get a lot of feedback really, really quickly. We've done that quite recently for a lot of the invention stuff, how people have felt about it, and then you can get a real sense of what the overall opinion is rather than the select few that are really vocal about it. And the reason why these ones do particularly well, what we would expect if we linked to a straw poll, probably be about 300 votes on them. With these, you're likely to get, well, we've been getting in excess of 1,500. And I think it's because they're a lot more mobile friendly. When you scroll through them, you can just tap them really, really quickly on a touch screen. And I think that has a lot to do with why you would get more engagement on sort of those native polls. And as I mentioned before, Twitter's becoming more paid marketing friendly, so it's becoming a little bit more algorithmically focused. So I've tried to come up with what would be a perfect post. I know you can never have perfection, but I've tried to incorporate as many different things as I possibly can into try and show you what that looks like on a tweet. So it tends to be around about 100 to 120 characters. That includes an image or a link. I don't know why that is, but data has shown that that is the reason why. Adding relevant images where possible, you can add up to 4 images. So when you've got things like teasers, you can add 3 or 4 different images to the post, and you can ask for people's opinions on them. That's what we do quite a lot. It gets a lot of engagement. You can use Twitter's native integration, so Vine and Periscope, and it makes it look a lot more aesthetically pleasing than if you do other things, you link via other means. And I'm going to mention this in a couple of other ones as well, but you need to post your best content at your peak times and at the weekends as well. I know a lot of brands actually, because they don't have anybody in the office at the weekends, don't actually put anything out at the weekends. And for most cases, actually, your audience is going to be most active at the weekends, and that's the same for RuneScape as well. So make sure you're putting stuff out at the weekends as well, because it's a bit of a downtime as well for brands. And Twitter cards, I haven't mentioned them yet. They're something that Twitter don't really shout a lot about, but they're a way that they make links look a little bit more pretty in your timelines, so you can see a bit more of like the images that are actually on the host page. You can see some of the more of the metadata, you can see kind of a title, all that kind of stuff. You just need to set up your website so that you can do it that way. And most people who are successful on Twitter are human, believe it or not. No, they behave like human beings. They have a sense of humour, they have a sense of humanity, and they encourage people to engage with them more so than somebody who's just spouting out marketing messages over and over again. Oh, I've got my clicker, I should have done that. So I've used the old school account as kind of setting up a Twitter account for success. We used it as an example because they do a lot of good things. So as you can see, you've got kind of a call to attention in the image, which is really, really good. It's a good way of being able to get people on your page and getting them to do something almost immediately. And I've put the dimensions that a good header image would be on there as well. We have a special social media logo, which we have for RuneScape as well. Which fits within the guidelines of a Twitter logo, and we have that across all the social media as well. It's bold and it's clear, and it pretty much does what it says on the tin. You've got a clear description of what the account is. It says the official old school RuneScape Twitter account, so I mean, fairly simple. You've got a link to your website as well, so people have somewhere to go straight after they've seen your page for the first time. But another few things you might want to consider, Twitter will allow you to pin a post. So think about what your pin post is going to be. Is it going to be something that's been updated recently on your game? Is it going to be a special offer, competition? Have a think, but change them regularly because you don't want it to stagnate too much. Think about your Twitter handle. We chose old school RS because RS is quite well known within the gaming industry as RuneScape as it is, and we wanted to emphasise the nostalgia, the old schoolness of the brand, and it didn't let us do old school RuneScape as a lengthy Twitter handle. And something that obviously Old School have done really, really well, but how can you leverage your header image? How can you make sure that people are doing something after they see your profile? Some top tips. We do really, really well on Twitter when we try and engage with trending hashtags in a RuneScapey way. Not only do our audience like it, but also people who are engaging on the hashtag also quite enjoy them as well. So we tend to get a lot more engagement out of those kinds of things. And obviously, the more nostalgia you can put in these kinds of things, the more people will remember it. So Elemental Workshop always does well when we do things like 3 words that make me want to cry or something like that. Don't use more than 2 hashtags in a tweet. It looks spammy. Twitter's got really good analytics data. So what you can do with an image now, I don't think, if you see these things here, if you click these things here, you should be able to get a sort of a sub-menu come down which says analytics, and it will show you how well that particular tweet is done. So you can see, and you can kind of get a sense of the kinds of things that do well, what get click-throughs, etc., etc. And I mentioned about integrated programs and native content, Vine, Periscope, uploading GIFs and images directly through Twitter. Engaging with influencers, this is something that we're really looking to do more of in 2016 with RuneScape and Old School and Chronicle as well. Even if you see something that an influencer puts out and you think, oh, we can engage with that in a RuneScapey way. Again, your audience really like it because they think you're having a bit of fun, having a bit of banter between brands. That always goes down quite well. But it also shows that influencer as well that we're quite a fun brand as well. And they're more likely to engage with us in the future, which then sparks off more engagement in the future. And this is one of my personal bugbears with social media. If you're mentioning someone, put them in a tweet. Mention them in the tweet. Use their Twitter handle, because the amount of people that I see that write RuneScape and have a comment about RuneScape and they don't actually tag us in there, we could be getting so many more impressions for it. We could be getting so much more engagement for it. We get so many more followers for it. And another thing, if you are mentioning someone or you're talking about someone, don't use their Twitter handle as the first character of the tweet because it thinks it's just a reply to that person. If you're doing a public tweet, stick a little dot in front of it and then everyone will be able to see it. If not, it'll only be the people that follow both you and that other person that will be able to see it. And it sounds really conceited, but replying to yourself can be quite a good thing on Twitter. If there's something that has gone out much earlier in the day and you are looking to sort of give it a little bit of a second wind, if you reply to it, don't include any other Twitter handles. It's then become another public tweet and it draws attention to what you've done beforehand. We find this quite useful when we do things like hotfixes. So if we put something out whereby we say, or for customer service announcements actually, say if we've got a bit of server downtime or forum downtime, for instance, you can then reply back to that tweet and say, this is now fixed. And it kind of isolates it, means that it's kind of done, but it shows that we have done something about it, basically. Move on to Facebook. And I mentioned before, it's got 1.5 billion accounts, one for every 4 people in the world. You can post out text, images, videos, and they allow you to be very, very creative with those kinds of content that you produce. And again, once again, native content is king. So Facebook video, all that kind of stuff, good. The EdgeRank algorithm, it means you're lucky to reach 10% of your follower base unless you're prepared to pay. So we've got 1 million followers. We are lucky without paying if we reach 100,000 of those. And that's with a particularly engaging tweet. Facebook's really, really good for targeting. A lot of people ask me, what is the point in targeting a post? Because you're basically just limiting your potential target audience. And my answer to that is something like, well, if, for instance, you're putting something out about the Super Bowl, obviously your audience is going to be predominantly US-based, and you don't necessarily want people in France to be able to see that, for instance. They're not really going to have the same, it's not going to evoke the same amount of emotion in them as it would do someone in the US. And if you've got a promotion which is just centered around a particular geographical location, you don't want everybody else to try and use that link as well, or use that particular offer as well. So you target things down. And Facebook's really, really good with that. And the analytics is really good. Analytics are really good as well. Some other things that you can use to market on Facebook: groups. There is a really big RuneScape group. I think about 30,000 people in it, and you can normally kind of integrate into those groups and try and sway some of the conversations. You can't use it as a brand. You can't use it as your brand page, but you go in there as an individual and kind of be a spy in the over the enemy walls, pretty much. You can also do things like events. We use them quite a lot for things like Game Blast, for Double XP Weekend, RuneFest. Gets people talking together, and it also means that they are less likely to forget about them. They feel more invested in it already, and they will get notifications when things are about to start. It says, don't forget, you've got an event at 7 o'clock today, or something like that. Again, we go into some tips on actually posting. You want to use clear visuals, and if it's a video, make sure that the thumbnail is clear and explains what the video is about. We found this out particularly with YouTube very, very recently. John is actually sitting there. One of his projects now is to try and make sure that when we put videos out, the thumbnails are very, very clear, and we've seen results straight away. Make sure you choose peak times and target your posts where appropriate. And again, I kind of reiterate that from all the other things that I've said so far. Push your audience's buttons. I mean, you know what your audience is like. You know what will make them do things. In RuneScape, more often than not, it is nostalgia. So we do these kinds of on this day kind of posts where people will think, oh God, that's 7 years ago now, 8 years ago now. I remember that, and they'll share their memories of that particular event. And we've also kind of brought that into the imagery as well. It's a very evocative image. People will think of certain things when they see that particular login screen. Make sure you keep text short, sweet, to the point. No one will read lots and lots of text on Facebook because it cuts off after 3 lines anyway. You have to read more. And on that note, make sure that any links that you put in there are in the first 3 lines of the post as well, because otherwise you won't get anywhere near the amount of clicks. Something else, and this harks back to the whole talking to people thing, which is kind of what social media is about. A post isn't finished when it goes out. You need to be thinking about engaging on the post after you put it out. And one of the really useful things, and I think I mentioned this to quite a lot of the customer service team or the player support team when we go through sort of social media stuff, is that actually when you respond to something, or the page responds to their own posts, it goes right up to the top of that post. So if you're clever and you can respond to the positive things and say like, oh, great update, great work guys, and you reply just a simple thanks, for instance, that will then shoot up to the top of that comment sort of pool of comments. So if you can keep the positive ones at the top, that's what more people will see. And if you can kind of reply to the negative ones as well, but reply to them afterwards, then people are less likely to see them. So support requests, that kind of thing. It's really, really useful. So top tips for Facebook. Again, target your posts to each market's peak time and days. If you've got a post which is going out to an American audience, make sure it's not when they're asleep. Use native content where possible, engage after posting. Something that Facebook will allow you to do as well is use Facebook as your page. There's a little button in the top right-hand corner. If you use Facebook as your page, you're able to then comment on other brands' stuff, so stuff that other brands put out on Facebook, for instance, and you can engage with them. Again, people love having banter with brands, so you can engage with other brands. You can also hopefully steal some of their customers as well, because people will see you as quite a fun brand. People want to follow you on Facebook, and therefore that only increases what your reach is more likely to be. Experiment. I mean, probably Facebook and I would say something like Snapchat are the 2 areas that you want to be experimenting the most, because as I mentioned before, EdgeRank is really difficult to work out and really difficult to try and second guess. So if you do things that are slightly out of the ordinary and you use some of their new features, so one of the things they let you do now is they let you put together a image slideshow which turns into a video. And because they've released this, and they've obviously put quite a lot of resources into it, they will want that to be successful. They will want more people to see it. So try and use the new things, try and use them in new and creative ways, and fingers crossed it will end up reaping dividends for you. And also embrace the GIF. There's a website called Giphy, giphy.com, which will allow you to upload GIFs, and then you can just paste the link into a Facebook post, and it will allow you to, and it will sort of automatically load the GIF. Because beforehand, it would just let you upload a video and it wouldn't loop. Instagram, and as you can tell, I quite like Instagram. It's one of my favourite social media platforms. But in Instagram's case, it is true that a picture tells 1,000 words. It's beginning to get a bit more ad savvy. You might have seen some more sort of sponsored posts in your timelines in the last sort of 6 months or so. It's because Instagram is becoming a bit more ad savvy. They're really expensive, by the way, Instagram promoted posts. But I think given that they are owned by Facebook, you'll start to see a lot more of those coming forward. It's native on mobile. You can't really do much from a desktop on Instagram. You can only really view other people's profiles and comment as your page. You can't post anything out. It's great for brand recognition. Not much more to say on that one. And you get much higher engagement on Instagram, I've found anyway, than on other platforms. For instance, we get about 670 interactions per post on Instagram, which is a lot higher than something like Twitter. And it's kind of on a par with something like Facebook. And obviously, young people use it, get a new audience, get new people in. It makes sense, really. And there's a fun fact that I found. 129,300 people have used the RuneScape hashtag since Instagram's been in business, which is more than Team GB, which I thought was quite cool. I doubt that'll be the same after the summer, but hey-ho. And only 700 times less than Bloomingdale's. So we have a massive audience on there, and we haven't really leveraged it enough. And I'll be the first to admit that. When I started, Instagram wasn't even really on my radar, but we started it last year, I think about this time last year, and we're on 32,500 followers now, so that's quite an increase, and especially in the video games market as well. There's not an awful lot of video games on Instagram, so there is a big gap that needs to be filled. And here are a few graphs, and I apologise in advance because I know they're small, but just to illustrate why I like Instagram so much. As you can see, this is how many people who follow you that actually engage with your posts. Whereas on Facebook and Twitter, it is less than 0.1%. On Instagram, it's 4.2%. So that is an incredibly high number, and definitely take note of it. This one here is just 12 to 24-year-olds internet usage, the one on the left here. As you can see, Instagram comes up kind of second on the list there, and it's getting caught up by Snapchat, but it's soon probably going to overtake Facebook. And this one here is more of a qualitative survey. It asked teens what their most important social media network was, and Instagram comes top of the pile. But you'll also notice that a lot of the mobile ones have done really, really well in recent years. So Vine, Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, they're all kind of coming to the fore now. The perfect Instagram post. Obviously, I've used NXT. It's the most beautiful thing that we've got at the moment. So post out clear, beautiful, clear imagery, things that will make people want to engage with what you're doing. You can't see it because it actually just says posted 2 days ago, but posted at a peak time. Relevant high traffic hashtags. I'll go into hashtags in a little bit more detail in a sec. And I'm always of the opinion that it doesn't really matter how many you put on there, more is better. More people are going to follow you because of putting hashtags than they are going to unfollow you. And that's what we found. You've got a CTA there with a trackable link. Unfortunately, hyperlinks don't appear in descriptions like they would do in other platforms, only if you pay for it and do promoted posts with it, which is a little bit frustrating, but it means at least you can track it if people type that out on their mobiles. And you have a call to engagement there as well. One thing that I find really upsetting, and this is what I don't like about Instagram, because I'm a wordsmith, I like using words, is that actually sticking an emoji with 2 heart eyes on it actually means more than saying, we absolutely love this, it's absolutely brilliant. Something that just happens on Instagram, well, not just on Instagram, but social media in general, apparently using emojis means that you get more engagement, which is sad, but we kind of have to pander to it. Some top tips for Instagram. Research and use high traffic hashtags. There are a lot out there and a lot that are relevant for your business as well. So make sure that you're engaging with people and you're also searching them and engaging as your brand on those hashtags as well. Think about using text in your imagery to encourage calls to attention, as Old School RuneScape did in their Twitter header. Instagram supports 15-second videos, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually you can cram a lot into 15 seconds. Use a tool like Iconosquare, which is a really fantastic analytics platform for Instagram. It's really, really cheap as well. I think it's only something like, if you use the medium package, it's something like $20 a year or something like that. And that means you'll be able to see things like who your peak audiences are, what times they're on, and then you can make sure that you're posting out at those times. Engaging with other brands and figures in your sector I kind of already covered, and your picture quality is absolutely vital. So think about your filters, think about what it is you want to show, what kind of camera angles you've got, all that jazz. So Reddit. Reddit is a small, well, I'd say it's absolutely giant for RuneScape. Half of our website traffic comes through, or referral traffic anyway, comes through Reddit. And I've used probably the most jargon-tastic first sentence up there I think I've ever put. Meritocratic user-submitted content aggregation system. Basically means if you put good content, it goes to the top. You split it into several kind of subreddits, and you'll be able to access them by putting /r/ whatever it is. You have a very hyper-engaged audience on that platform, and I'm sure that if anybody has been on Reddit as a Jagex employee, you'll know how engaged our Reddit community are, especially with all things RuneScape. If you make a mistake, you probably will get mocked for it. You can submit links or text posts. This morning I actually learned that you don't get any karma for submitting a text post, which is something that I didn't know, but I'll go on to karma in a sec. Make sure you abide by Rediquette, which is the etiquette, Reddit etiquette, and they've got a massive list for each subreddit as to what you are and what you're not allowed to do, and use proper formatting as well. Again, you'll get called up on it. You get something called like magic internet points with karma. So if people like your content, they'll upvote it. If they don't like it, they'll downvote it. If you get upvotes, you kind of get like a magic number in the top of your profile, which will indicate how kind of people like you on that subreddit. And it's RuneScape's highest referrer of website traffic. Moving on to YouTube, I'm going to have to try and speed things up because I'm aware I've probably got about 10 minutes left. But things to consider, I mentioned thumbnails beforehand. Have you set up your profile correctly? YouTube have got a really good kind of tutorial system when you set up an account to actually tell you what it is you've done, what you need to do in order to optimize your platform a lot better. So make sure you kind of follow their lead on that one. Include annotations and calls to attentions where you can in your posts, in your videos and in your descriptions as well. Use the analytics platforms that they have available to you. You can stick stuff into playlists, which makes it a lot easier if people are coming across your website, your YouTube account, to actually access them and to be able to separate what they like and what they don't like. And you'll find that actually you'll get quite a lot of views on your playlists. So for instance, our podcasts tend to get a lot of very hyper engaged people listen to them, and they will listen to 5 or 6 at a time. And this will, because YouTube is owned by Google, this will help your search engine optimization and your YouTube ranking. You make sure you include keywords in your video name, your tags, and your descriptions as well. And the rest, I won't really discuss too much about Vine, Snapchat, or Tumblr because we're running out of time. But I will send this all round afterwards, and it's being recorded as well, so you can check those out afterwards. Now we get into the nitty-gritty. So managing your time, tracking your success, and some tips of the trade. So one of the most difficult things about social media is not getting too immersed into it. Like, I know a lot of people that can lose hours and hours and hours of their day just by scouring Twitter, scouring Facebook, scouring Reddit. You don't need to spend your life on social in order to be successful on it. Just be smart with what you're doing, use social media management tools, and Bob's your uncle, really. You don't have to create all your content yourself. Again, we're really lucky in this aspect with RuneScape because our community produce an awful lot of useful content that we can then just share out and aggregate out to our audiences. Make sure you make the most of what you do post though. So again, use peak times, produce quality rather than quantity. Post out things less often, but with more gravitas. Avoid distractions. So if you are doing something else at the same time as doing social, I would advise not doing it. I know that's really difficult, but you can then blitz through things a lot quicker. So if you use a useful social media management tool, then you can pretty much schedule what you want to do over the course of a day, maybe in 15, 20 minutes or so, whereas if you've got distractions, it might take you an hour and a half to do as well. And using social media management products. I've got a slide for these in a sec to kind of show what each of them does, but it helps you save times. And by what I mean by social media management tool is something that will either allow you to post out as your brand or multiple different brands at the same time, something that will allow you to schedule posts for when you're not around, something that will show you analytics, or something that will allow you to curate all of your content in one place. Basically saves time and energy and sanity as well sometimes. You need to work out what works, create a steady stream of content, and when you do put things out, make sure you sort of allocate 5 or 10 minutes or so just to make sure that you're checking it afterwards. Because having that steady stream of content is great, but if you're then not responding to things that happen after you post it out, then that's when problems start to happen. So I made a little Venn diagram here with all of the social media tools that I could think of, and tried to kind of show which ones I thought fit into each of these particular areas. So content curation, social media monitoring and posting, and social media analytics, and combinations of those three sort of circles as well. We use Hootsuite, believe it or not, and I wonder why that could be, because it fits into all of them. But there are plenty of really good ones, and there are some really good free ones in there as well. So Buffer is really good as a free one, and if you're quite a casual social media user, I'd really recommend you use it. It will allow you to schedule up to 5 tweets or 5 posts over the course of a day. Really, really useful, and as I said, it's free as well, which is really good. All the Google ones are free as well, so Google Analytics, Google Alerts. Alerts will allow you to create alerts based on a particular keyword or particular keywords, and you can get sent sort of really useful or really pertinent content around the web that you can then share out to your audiences. But again, I'll whiz through that quite quickly. What I'll do afterwards is I'll send around this presentation, or it'll be sent around in a video afterwards, so you can look at these in a bit more detail. Tracking success, because if you can't measure your social media impact, there is no point in doing it. And it is the bane of my life in particular, being able to track things. It's really, really difficult to be able to work out how much you're spending, and then work out the return on investment on that spend. But my advice would be to make sure you have those tools in place before you kickstart a campaign. I mentioned that right at the beginning. So set your goals, what are you measuring, what does success look like, and does it include monetary return as well? It's not all about the money sometimes, it is about changing that perception of a company, it's maybe about offering customer service, sometimes about retention as well. Using social media management tools and native analytics will allow you to track impressions, engagement, website referrals, anything that it can on its own platform, which can be really, really useful. Sometimes they're not that great, indicating sort of return on investment, for instance, but they do give an indication of how engaging your posts are. And make sure you separate between organic and paid social activity. Normally it should be quite obvious, but sometimes I know that, particularly on a Facebook page, for instance, you'll see that you have a massive spike in reach, and then when you look at it, it's because someone's put out a paid post and you weren't aware of it. And review, reset, reiterate what I mentioned at the start. Do it every 2 or 3 months or so, based on kind of the different aims that your company now has or different varying factors that you have. And yeah, just as a quick reminder, don't forget the importance of social media for things that you can't measure. So brand advocacy, sentiment around your brand, overall brand perception over a long period of time. And just a quick few notes about what I see the future of social being. And I mentioned beforehand how mobile, a lot of the fastest growing social media platforms are native on mobile. That's only going to get more pronounced. You will see Facebook splitting up its varying different, I'd say apps anyway. So like Messenger, for instance, has already done it, but you'll start to see things like events and all that becoming separate apps unto themselves so people can more easily access them on mobile. Platforms will continue to offer preferential treatment to native content, paid content and optimized content. That's because they want the stuff that goes through their own website to be successful, and also the things that get them money. And as more and more people use social, about 2/3 of Americans are currently on a social media platform, targeting and quietening the noise. So targeting from a brand's point of view and quietening the noise from a consumer's point of view will become more and more important. So you'll start to end up having 3,000 or 4,000 followers on Twitter, of which you probably only care about 100 of them. So people will try and find ways to be able to quieten that noise, and brands need to be aware of that and try to make themselves one of those 100 that they actually do listen to. In conclusion, people need to be smart, provide great content, and use platforms in unique ways to break through that noise. And hopefully that's what we do at Jagex. So I've pretty much nearly come to the end, and I'm nearly at an hour, so I'm quite happy with that. But how you can get involved, if you haven't already got a work social media account, it's a really good way to kind of dip your toe into the water of social media. The RuneScape community can be quite unforgiving sometimes, but they generally are lovely to new people, and you learn tips of the trade from sort of other JMods. And obviously, if you've got any questions about any of that, come to myself, and I'll answer them as best I can. We offer obviously Instagram, Twitter. Most people have a Twitter one, but we offer Instagram, Tumblr, and Reddit accounts as well. A lot of people have Reddit accounts as well. So if any of those take your fancy, and obviously I'm looking to try and get more people on Instagram, hint, hint, let me know, and I'll sort of help you get that set up. And just a final little quote. Hopefully it's kind of what I've been saying for the entire presentation, but social media is about the people, not about your business. Provide for the people, and the people will provide for you. That's it. So yeah, anybody got any questions at all? Where can we follow RuneScape? Okay, we are on, all right, I'll try and remember. So we've got obviously Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Instagram, Tumblr, Snapchat, Vine, Flickr. I love it when people send me Snapchats. I haven't had any nudes at all yet.
You don't want me, though?
No, maybe not. But yeah, I think that's pretty much the exhaustive list. If you manage to find another one, let me know. Yeah, any other questions? Oh yeah, YouTube and Twitch. Sorry, I didn't include those. The video ones, yeah. What platforms does RuneScape get the most benefit from? I'd say in terms of pure numbers, I mean, if you look at things like referral traffic, for instance, Reddit is miles ahead of everything else. But there is a lot of value in Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, and growing in a more sort of growing sense, Instagram, more for brand recognition more so than anything else with Instagram. But it's definitely, I mean, we've seen pretty much referral traffic on social go up pretty much every single month since April 2015 or 2014. So that's hopefully a sign that the RuneScape audience are becoming more socially aware and actually using social media more than they were 18 months ago. Dave?
How do you see different communities reacting to what we do? Are they differing?
Yes. Yeah, okay, so it's difficult to kind of socially profile communities, but Reddit tend to be some of the most cynical. but they also tend to be some of the most useful as well because they're the hardened players. Twitter, you generally get a lot of happy clappy people who are sort of a lot trying to please you quite a lot of the time, but there are a few that will bite back. Instagram, kind of the more artsy people, as with Tumblr, you get a lot of artsy people and a lot of people who are the fashionscapers. You get on Facebook a lot of peripherals, a lot of marginals, which is why we've got 1 million Twitter followers and that's 1 million Facebook followers even, and that's quite disparate compared to the other platforms. We get a lot of marginal people on there. And Twitch, again, it's quite similar to Reddit really in the sense that they are very trolly sometimes, but they obviously know a lot about the game in most aspects.
Do you find any of those communities are best representative of the average internet player?
Oh, it's a good question. I would say probably the one that most reflects our player base is probably Reddit. So take that as you will. So the question was, what would the recommendations for Jagex as a company be on Twitter or social media in general? I think we could be doing more with LinkedIn, especially for things like recruitment and that kind of thing. I think we should be looking at expanding the Jagex brand as well. I know we're obviously looking at a rebrand, but we could be doing a lot more to highlight the individual successes of all of our particular games that we have. It kind of falls into a little bit of a black hole really, because with a big update, you have obviously trying to shout about it loads on the individual platform, the game platforms, but sometimes you neglect that actually it sometimes has more gravitas coming from the actual overall company as a sort of overarching brand. So I think maybe just more activity on them as well as diversification of platforms sometimes as well. Any other questions? No? Okay then, thank you very much for tuning in. I think I managed to keep it to about an hour, which I was kind of aiming to. I did it last night and I ended up taking an hour and a half, so you guys are lucky. But yeah, if you have any questions at all, anything pops into your head, just chuck me an email, send me a spark. I won't bite, unless you ask me to. Yeah, hope you enjoyed it, so have a good afternoon.